Hey, and welcome back to Driver 88. Back in 2016, I had the utter privilege of being able to own a supercar, and I did not grow up with a Lamborghini poster on my wall or a Ferrari at all. And so I had this deep sort of quest to find out about McLaren cars. Something about the racing pedigree and Bruce McLaren's, I guess, underdog attitude and what he achieved in such a short amount of time drew me to the 570S, and I was one of the very first people in Australia to own one. I enjoyed that car so much that in 2017 I was able to purchase a 720S. Now that car, as much as it gave me some of the best automotive experiences I've ever had, was a little bit of a letdown in that I had to go back to the dealer 7 times in 7 months, and then I took a journey with Porsche. Today we're driving the 750S. 30% new parts apparently, better in all sorts of small ways, a little bit of a facelift. I'm going to see whether, for a person who's owned a 570 and a 720S, is the 750 worth spending the extra money on. So obviously it looks very much like the older 720S. I think this is an incredibly good looking car, just a terrible spec. We've filmed another couple of cars in the dealership that look much more simpler than this and look fantastic. Particularly the rear, I much prefer the new exhaust setup and design of the rear of the car compared to a 720S. The front of the car gets a little bit wider, larger intakes as well. I really like these design details a la LT. There's 3 different wheels to choose from. These are the Vortex shape, which I do not like at all. The turbine standard wheel I think looks way better than these, so I would pick those. Again, a bit of a weird spec choice on this car. Now, carbon bonnet, again, doesn't fit the Super Series at all. Don't pick a carbon bonnet in my opinion, but I guess it's up to the individual. The rear of the car also has an incredibly expensive carbon bumper. I don't know why. I wouldn't particularly pick it, but I think it's about 20,000 Australian dollars. Speaking of price, back in 2016, I paid $420,000 for my 570S. The 720 ended up being $570,000. This car, all up spec, is just over $800,000, but it starts at $643,000. So in the sort of 7 years since I owned the 720S, the list price or sticker price has gone up about 20%. Whether that's worth it or not, I think it's also worth looking at some used, almost brand new 720S examples for the same money. Now, what McLaren does better than almost any other brand with supercars is the ingress and egress. Of course, it's incredibly easy to get in and out of a 570 and a 720S. The 750 is no different. Interior changes, there's a few, and a number of them are beneficial. We've got, of course, our modes to be changed above our binnacle. The center screen, look, it's still, I don't think, really up to standard, but the screen in front of you is perfectly fine. We have a few other bits and pieces that have changed. We've got lots of choices for carbon. These are the comfort seats. The standard stereo is just a 4-speaker. You do, for 10,000 Australian dollars, able to pick a Bowers & Wilkins, which is on this particular example. You've also got a carbon interior, so this being a sort of demo spec has got lots of things ticked on it. If you're looking at a 750, I truly don't think you need to pick many options at all. The car really doesn't need much. As long as you've got a front lift, you're going to be having a good time in this car. So let's talk about performance. 30 more brake horsepower, 30 more Newton meters, as if the 720 even needed it back then. This is a genuine 9-second car, guys. Rear-wheel drive, genuine 9-second car, not even on a perfect surface. Next time you call a car a supercar killer and it does 10s, it's not a supercar killer, sorry. Enormous performance, as you'll see when we take this thing for a drive. The rear of the car is probably my favorite angle, despite the carbon bumper diaper thingy going on incredible looking, especially when the aero comes up with the larger wing. Now, McLaren Melbourne tells me that Australia is no longer taking new orders on the 750S. So if you want one, I guess you have to pick up some demos that are around or new models that are sitting on the showroom floor. This will be the last fully naturally aspirated McLaren you can buy. The next car, I believe, will be a V8 hybrid. That thing will be absolutely insane. Also, if you're looking at this sort of car, Lamborghini's just released, or very soon to release, its Hurricane replacement. But overall, there's just something incredibly unique about all the best attributes on a McLaren road car. Now, I promise I won't just ignore the kind of elephant in the room regarding McLaren Automotive. Me being an early adopter of 2 McLaren new cars, I did have a number of issues with my 720S, some regarding fit and finish and some regarding all sorts of little teething electrical issues. I've had no issues today with driving this 750S for the whole day, but I would assume that many of those things hopefully have been ironed out now in 2024, and it's probably worth getting a car that has been around for a number of years, that those things have been ironed out, rather than getting an early 720S like I did. So incredibly easy to get into McLaren cars. Let's take it for a spin. So little things that come to mind in comparing this to my old 720S. The first thing is it's nice to have these large aluminium paddles, which for my last 2 McLarens used to have these piddly little small paddles that just didn't cut it. The other thing is we have a little bit more noise at the back, a bit more burble in the exhaust, but I want even more. I definitely want more, and I think I would prefer, in almost all cases with McLarens, to buy the Spider form if you can, because you really don't lose out on much performance at all, and you get so much more experience hearing that exhaust crack behind you. So if you're in Australia, I can truly say from personal experience, a McLaren is one of the best supercars for terrible roads here in Victoria and Australia in general. It handles the bumps incredibly well, the potholes, the speed bumps now are far easier to traverse because you can lift your front nose much quicker. That's something that myself and customers complained about many years ago. And if you're ever looking at a comparison between a sports series, the 570, and a 720, or this car, the 750, it's night and day when it comes to poor roads like this, how well the suspension travels with this Super Series suspension. It's so much better than the Sports Series cars. So we're cruising on the freeway now, and the brilliant duality of the 750S comes to the fore again, because it's really very quiet in here for a supercar. We've got P0 Corsas on, not the Trofeo R's, so there's barely any tyre roar coming into the cabin at all. The engine's very quiet when you're in top gear and low RPM. It's just so easy to live with, and then of course you can wake everything up, as we will right now. Now as a little bit of rain starts to come down, I'm reminded of a time when I almost unalived myself in a 720S of my own, but I did have Trofeo R's on at the time. These are the Pirelli Corsas, and they're a good mix of, I guess, street and track, and they've warmed up pretty quickly as we've been driving. How does this feel compared to my old 720S? Well, it's got that incredible wall of torque, which comes on so nicely, of course. The car just feels very familiar as we turn things up a little bit more. There's definitely more burble and more turbo flutter than the stock 720. And you know, when the 7-speed dual clutch came out in the 720S, I thought it was a bit of a revelation. It was just as good as anything else that the other manufacturers had put out. There's arguably more shove. We've got 30 more horsepower, as I said before. Now the front end is 6 mil wider. I'm not sure if that's just the body or the actual track, but that's one thing that I was never a big fan of in the 720S, is the front end. We've only got 245s up front. I wish they were a little bit wider and gave me sort of the confidence of a 3RS, but no car is perfect. Oh yes, I absolutely love how McLarens react under braking. A few years ago, coming from 290 kilometers per hour on the straight at Phillip Island Grand Prix track, as I run out of breath, my 720S used to just perfectly settle down from that speed. And this car, with even more aero, wider intakes at the front and an even bigger wing, which not only looks good, but I'm sure will brake from incredibly high speeds. Speaking of course, we're at something like 330, I think 4 kilometers per hour as a maximum. Now, even though I prefer the front end of a 3RS and I prefer the buckets of a 3RS, I prefer the suspension in this car so much more. And these shifts have become so much more aggressive than the 720. That might be worth the extra 20% cost alone. On roads that aren't perfect throughout the corners, the car is just so perfectly flat. And whereas many other Porsches that I've driven, for example, GT cars, they get out of sorts pretty quickly once they start bouncing around. This car though, 800 Newton meters now from a rear wheel drive car. Oh, it just does feel like that 10 to 15% more of everything. Is it worth the money? I'm not entirely sure, but if you want a brand new car and you want to spec it exactly the way you want to spec it, I still think this is worth buying over a 720S. There she is. Now, it's been a while since I've owned those two McLarens, and I've had a number of Porsches since, but after enjoying this thing today in track mode, it makes me miss McLaren so much. It's such a brilliant car. It's easier to live with than the 720. It's got more power, it feels more capable, and a number of those little niggles that I didn't like have been fixed. It's just an incredible thing. I think you should take one for a drive, even if you have owned a 720S in the past. It's made me re-love this brand, and I think it definitely is worth the extra money because you can enjoy it here on the roads, not just the track. This is Driver 88. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.